You may be wondering, how do atoms and molecules stick together? Atoms and molecules are held together by chemical bonds. A chemical bond between atoms is similar to the attraction felt between two magnets. Eventually, if two magnets get close enough, the attraction becomes so strong they will eventually stick together. Like magnets, atoms feel an attraction for each other, and this attraction holds the atoms together in the form of a bond. A chemical bond occurs when two or more atoms in a molecule share or transfer electrons. Remember, an electron is a subatomic particle with a negative charge. Did you know the electrons involved in some types of chemical bonds are like money in your bank account? When you purchase things, you are spending money, causing your bank account to lose money. On the other hand, when you are bringing home a paycheck, you gain money into your bank account. The electrons involved in some chemical bonds are just like the money in your bank account. Some atoms tend to spend their electrons, causing a loss of electrons from their bank. An atom that loses electrons carries a positive charge. These atoms are shopaholics and easily spend their electrons. In the case of atoms, a bank account represents the electron cloud where electrons hang out. Remember that electrons are found in a large electron cloud outside of the nucleus. Unlike the shopaholic atoms, some atoms tend to bring home a paycheck, gaining electrons in their bank account. These atoms do not lose electrons and tend to only gain them. An atom that gains electrons carries a negative charge. Atoms that gain or lose electrons are called ions. An ion is an atom that carries a charge because it lost or gained one or more electrons. An ion carries a charge because the atom has an uneven amount of electrons and protons. Remember, all atoms have protons and electrons. Protons have a positive charge and electrons have a negative charge. An atom can only gain or lose electrons. The number of protons will always stay the same. An atom is considered neutral if it has no charge. A neutral atom has the same amount of protons and electrons. Since there are the same number of protons and electrons, they cancel each other out, giving it no charge. You can picture a neutral atom holding onto a scale. If the scale has the same amount of protons and electrons, it is considered balanced with no overall charge. For example, a neutral beryllium atom has 4 protons and 4 electrons. Since they have the same number of protons and electrons, there is no overall charge. Many atoms do not like to be neutral and love to gain electrons. These atoms are like greedy robbers and love to steal electrons from another atom. An example of an atom that loves to rob other atoms of their electrons is fluorine. Fluorine has the tendency to gain one or more electron from another atom, causing it to have more electrons than protons. When an atom gains electrons, the scale becomes off balance. An atom that has more electrons than protons is called an anion. An anion is an ion with an overall negative charge because it gained one or more electrons. Anions are usually nonmetals found on the right side of the periodic table. To help you remember that an anion carries a negative charge, look at the first and second letter of anion, A and N. This stands for a negative ion. Unlike the greedy robber atoms, some atoms are very generous and love to give away their electrons to another atom. For example, lithium has a tendency to lose one electron to another atom. Picture a lithium atom holding onto a scale that loses one electron. The scale becomes off balance because there are fewer electrons than protons. An atom with fewer electrons than protons is called a cation. A cation is an ion with an overall positive charge because it lost one or more electrons. Cations are usually metals, which are found on the left side of the periodic table. To help you remember that a cation carries a positive charge, Look at the cat and cation, and remember, cats are always positive. An atom that prefers to lose electrons will often form a bond with an atom that prefers to gain electrons. I am sure you have heard of the saying, opposites attract. This saying also applies to oppositely charged ions. Positively charged ions are attracted to negatively charged ions. When a cation and anion meet, it's like they get married and they form a strong, strong bond. When an anion and cation connect together, it is called an ionic bond. An ionic bond is a type of chemical bond formed between a cation and an anion. In an ionic bond, one or more electrons are transferred from a cation to an anion. An example of an ionic bond is sodium chloride, abbreviated as NaCl. Sodium chloride is also known as table salt, which basically comes in little granules. The granules are like little salt crystals, and those crystals are very stable. When you have a salt granule, it's not like you can easily crush it or change it into any other type of shape. In this ionic bond, sodium is a cation and chlorine is an anion. In this example, the sodium cation loses one electron, transferring it to the chlorine anion. Another example of an ionic bond is magnesium oxide, abbreviated as MgO. Magnesium is a cation that gives 2 electrons to an oxygen anion. In this lesson, you learned that atoms and molecules are held together by a chemical bond. A chemical bond occurs when 2 or more atoms in a molecule share or transfer electrons. This lesson focused on one type of chemical bond called an ionic bond. You learned that an ionic bond involves ions. An ion is an atom that carries a charge because it gained or lost 1 or more electrons. There are 2 types of ions, a cation and anion. An anion is an ion with an overall negative charge because it gained 1 or more electrons. A cation is an ion with an overall positive charge because it lost 1 or more electrons. A cation and anion are attracted to each other, and when they meet, they form an ionic bond. An ionic bond is a type of chemical bond formed between a cation and an anion.